Hi again. In this video, we're going to be talking about diatonic harmonic sequences. This is sort of the last topic on just kind of a purely harmonic issue. And it's going to fill in some of what we haven't talked about. Basically, things that don't involve the phrase model explicitly. Maybe where you might get some non-functional harmony, other ways of kind of filling in musical space. But one thing you tend to see a lot of times in the common practice era are the use of these harmonic sequences. They're best known from the Baroque era, but are used freely in all eras and also in popular music. So I think you'll find lots of use for this concept. All right, first off, some basic definitions. A sequence is a series of immediately transposed repetitions of a melodic or harmonic idea, usually creating a consistent pattern of transposition. So basically immediate transpositions that form a pattern. Diatonic harmonic sequences involve the transposition of a harmonic pattern within the diatonic scale. So we stay within the diatonic scale. These sequences often accompany melodic sequences. So we'll be looking at both the harmonic pattern and also the melody that goes along with it. Now, a sequence consists of the following elements. One is the model, the original idea, which is usually a two-chord group. Now, and then there's the copy, which is the immediate transposed repetition of the pattern. Now, from a melodic standpoint, let's say you might have, that would be a model, and then that would be the copy. That's sort of the idea of a sequence. Model, copy. See how I just moved the pattern up by step? In the case of a harmonic sequence, you're going to have like a two-chord group that's your model. So the group might be that then gets copied at some level. All right. Now we'll talk about four basic sequence types here, all of which also have some variants that involve like inversions and things like that. So I'll start by describing it in terms of a root position progression, and then I'll show you some of the variants of this. All right, first up, the descending fifths sequence. All right, this is by far the most common one. Almost every piece you look at is going to have some sort of descending fifth sequence from the classical and Baroque era. It's just so extremely common. When you hear it, you'll recognize it immediately. Now, this is named by the pattern of the chord roots. Okay, the chord roots descend by fifths, such as C, F, B, E, A, D, G, C. All right. Again, so you're kind of thinking abstractly to recognize these. You look at the root pattern. So the root pattern here that you're usually going to see, let's say, again, if you're in root position, now it's all down by fifths, but usually what you see is down by fifth, up by fourth, down by fifth, up by fourth. See how down by fifth, up by fourth, down by fifth, up by fourth, down by fifth, up by fourth, down by fifth. Now, and this is going to naturally land you back on the tonic chord. Kind of can start on one, you can go all the way through it. And this will accompany a melodic sequence down by second. So notice that what I bracketed here is the model, all right? And notice how it keeps getting moved down by second. This is what creates this sense of a sequence. This is your two-chord group that keeps getting transposed down. So it's basically like a melodic sequence that goes down by second. So sometimes you'll notice that this is this sequence just by the way the melody is moving. Let me read the next couple things and I'll play you this one. Now notice the following thing. In minor keys, and this is the first one I have up here, we use the diatonic 7 chord. I've put Roman numerals here, but as we'll find out, a lot of times we don't need to use Roman numerals in the middle of the sequence because you kind of have a suspension of functional harmony. But this is what it would look like. And in minor, you actually use the diatonic 7, and you don't use the leading tone until you get to 5. Now also notice that both progressions use one tritone in the bass. In the minor one, you get it right here, between the 6 and the 2 diminished. In the major key, you get it really soon. You get it almost immediately between the 4 and the 7. Now, for that reason, you actually find fewer examples of the major key, the full major key, descending fifth sequence. A lot of times, composers will start it a little bit later to avoid that tritone happening so early. In the minor key, it happens late, so you're already used to the pattern, and it doesn't really affect you too much. And then notice 3 that the voice leading of the model will be exactly replicated in the copies. Now, you won't need to do any voice leading for this, but that's going to be true for how this works. All right, let me play you these 2 examples. First off, in a minor key. Oh, sorry. So notice how it just naturally brings you back to the 1 chord. In a major key, a little awkward at the beginning. The tritone right here. Okay. So again, descending fifth sequence, the root pattern, you'll see down by fifth, up by fourth, or basically the roots are all descending by fifth. And you'll notice the melodic sequence down by second. Now, this, like I said, this sequence is used so much that there's a whole bunch of variants for it. This is on the next page. We have a bunch of variants that involve whether or not we add a 7th to the chord. We can add 7ths, or we can also invert chords. So I've just shown you a few of the options here. This first one, I've added 7ths to every other chord. This one here, I've added 7ths to every single chord. If you do that, by the way, you will get an alternation of complete and incomplete chords. So you'll have, like this one is lacking the 5th. And then also you can use some inversions, like right here. It changes what the bass line looks like, but the root pattern is still the same. And then lastly, another one where I kind of combine the use of inversions and 7ths. Let me play these for you and I'll call out what I'm doing here. So first one, I'm just going to add a 7th to every other chord. There's a 7th. Okay, so just makes it a little bit more interesting. Next one, I'm going to add a 7th to every chord after the initial tonic. I really like the sound of that one. Then next one, this is at B. I'm just going to add a first inversion or first inversion 7th chord here, use the 6-5 position. So the bass is different. And then I'll cadence. And then my favorite one is if you alternate 6-5 and 4-2. This is really nice. But again, all these variants, if you were doing a chord analysis of the roots, you would still see the falling 5th roots. It's just the bass might be different if you invert the chords. All right, so that's the descending 5th. Let's go on to our next type. This is another one that as soon as you hear it, you'll recognize this one. This is what we call the descending thirds sequence, often known as the Pachelbel canon sequence for being used in the Pachelbel Canon in D, very famous piece. Now, as the name implies, this one is going to accompany a melodic sequence that goes down by thirds, but the root pattern, this is number 1, is down by 4th, up by 2nd. Okay, that's what you're going to keep doing over and over again. Down by 4th, up by 2nd, down by 4th, up by 2nd. Right here, down by 4th, up by 2nd, down by 4th, up by 2nd, down by 4th, up by 2nd. And this one now usually stops at some point. In actual music, the composer tends to stop it somewhere around either the 4 chord or the 2 chord, and then we do a predominant, dominant tonic. But basically, the chords in between on the weak beats tend to be kind of weak, and the chords on the strong beats are kind of falling down by thirds. It's just a really nice way of harmonizing this, and you can easily link it up at the very ending with some functional chords. Now, what you can also do is this second chord here, I can invert it, and I can get this nice passing stepwise bass there. If the second chord is in inversion, first inversion, I'm going to get this nice stepwise bass. So you really get passing motions in between all the chord groups. All right, let me play this for you. Here's the root position version. And then I'm going to break it here. Now the second one with the inversions, and you get the nice passing bass. Then again, I'm going to break it at this point here. So again, when I later have you analyze some examples, you will often know as soon as you hear it that this is the one you're encountering, because this to me is such a unique sounding sequence. All right, last two sequences. These are maybe encountered a little bit less often. This one is the least common one you'll encounter. Basically, this is called the ascending fifths. So ascending fifths here. It's basically the reverse of the descending fifths. So the root pattern will be up by fifth, down by fourth, or all just moving up by fifths. And since this is the reverse of the descending fifth sequence, it tends to accompany a melodic sequence up by second. Remember how the descending fifths would go down by second? This one goes up by second. So notice the brackets here, how they keep moving up. But as you'll hear when I play this for you in a second, this sequence, it kind of goes to nowhere. It goes to somewhere that's not particularly useful. So you have to break it usually pretty early because it doesn't naturally lead to the tonic. So you'll notice I break this very, very soon, and then or very early, and then I break into a predominant dominant at the ending. All right, let's hear what this sounds like. Oh, sorry. Break it right here. Again, not quite as naturally useful because it moves you away from a functional progression. Very much the opposite of the descending fifth, which takes you naturally to a 5-1 at the ending. Now, a little more useful and definitely more stylistically common, especially in the Baroque era, is this last one I'm going to talk about. This one actually has the name, the ascending step sequence. This one, of course, really does also move up by a second, a melodic sequence by second, but the root pattern is different. Okay, so this is going to take a little bit of memorization. The root pattern of this one is down by third, up by fourth. All right, so notice here, down by third, up by fourth, down by third, up by fourth, down by third, up by fourth, kind of ramping you up as you go along there. Now, the variant, and this is a really interesting variant, this is at B. If you take this second chord, the chords on the weak beats that I have in my example here, and I put them in first inversion, you can actually just get a static bass. So it goes same note, then up the next note. You kind of keep holding that note over. And it's called the 5-6 technique sometimes because that's the intervals above the bass. As you'll hear when I play it, that one almost sounds like there was no chord change in the second chord. Almost sounds like an anticipation or something like that. All right, so the ascending step sequence, as I mentioned, down by third, up by fourth. And again, that's the root pattern. So if the chords are in root position, that's what the bass will do. But if I invert it, like at B, it'll give me a different bass line. All right, let me play this for you. All right, first up, the root position one. And again, I'll have to break it at some point to make this work musically, or put it at some other spot, maybe not starting on 1. And now the second one, the 5-6 technique. Oh, sorry. All right, notice how the second chord on that one, you barely even heard it as a chord change. You could definitely hear the similarity between the root position version, but it's also very, very different. All right, so those are our 4 sequences, descending fifth, a descending third, ascending fifths, and ascending step. Now let's go on and do the rest of this is going to be some analysis. So let's move on to the next page. Next few pages. I've got a whole bunch of examples here that we're going to use for practice. I'll do the first one for you for demonstration, and then the other ones I want you to do on your own. Then we'll take a look at my answers. So for doing this analysis, and this is what you'll be doing also on your homework, bracket the model in copies. And while you're doing that, identify the interval of transposition, get an idea about what it might be. Number 2, label the chords with chord symbols showing root and position. So not Roman numerals, but root and position, because that's what's going to help you figure out what the sequence is. And then use Roman numerals sparingly. I will just do it at the beginning and ending of the sequence. See how you get into it and how you get out of it in terms of the key. So this first one, this is my answer for this first one to show you how this might look. So what I've done here is I've started off by bracketing the model and the copies. And you'll notice here, that's the model, and then copy, then next one. Now, so we get that. Then we get another model. Notice how we got a smaller model right there and another copy. So you have a bigger model and a copy, and then we get a smaller model and a copy. So, but the interesting thing about this is we notice that it's moving down by step, right? A, G, F, E. That makes me think immediately that this is going to be some sort of descending fifth sequence. Then when I analyze the chords, I look at the roots, A, D, G, C, F, B, E, A, all down by fifths, right? So here it moves by what each measure the chord changes. Then we get the sped up right here. That's why we had the sequence, or the model got smaller right there. And this takes you all the way from A minor back to A minor. So it starts on a 1 chord, and then we get the 5 to 1 at the ending. So this is what your analysis should look like. And again, I'm kind of using various bits of information to figure this out. I'm looking at the model and copies and seeing how it's transposed. Then I'm analyzing the chord roots, and then it'll help me figure out what the sequence is. And then I just use Roman numerals at the beginning and the end to see how this whole thing functions in the larger sense. But, you know, Roman numerals through the rest of it, well, they're not really functional. They don't really get functional till around here, just sort of moving it through a sequence. All right, now the rest of these, I won't take time to play these for you. I want you to go ahead and pause your video now and work through all the rest of these examples. Then I'll show you my answers and talk us through them. Okay, so now hopefully you've had some time to work through this. Let's take a look at my answers. All right, so for this Mozart violin sonata, here's a great example of the descending third sequence. And so on. All right, notice how the model and the copies move down by thirds. And notice how the roots, down by fourth, up by second, down by fourth, up by second, down by fourth, up by second. And these are root positions, so that's literally what the bass does. Down by fourth, up by second, down by fourth, up by second. And then, like I said, this one stops at the G minor chord, the 2, and we end with the 2, 5, 1. So there's always going to be a break in the pattern, usually around the cadence. That kind of has to happen for all of these except the descending fifth, which could potentially go all the way from tonic back to tonic. All right, so there's a root position descending third sequence. All right, on to the next one. Okay, this one's a descending fifth sequence. Once again, notice how the brackets I've done there, how it keeps moving down by step. So that's your indication that this is probably descending fifth. But then when you work through the chords, the only thing that's different about this one is the use of inversions. So I still see the roots going down by fifths, right? G, C, F sharp, B, E, A, D, G. The roots are descending by fifth. But since the first chord in each bracket is a first inversion triad, the bass is different. So this produces a very different kind of bass line. You kind of go up by second, then down by third, up by second, down by third. But it's still the descending fifth sequence. Now the function of this one is actually, the main key of this is C major, but this was actually a modulation to G major. So it's just a full run through the sequence in G major. So I have a 5. At the very ending, I get a functional 2, 6, 5, 6 to 1. This is sort of in the transition of this piece. All right, so descending fifth, just a little bit different with the use of inversions. All right, next up, the CPE Bach example. This is an example of the descending third sequence. If you look at my brackets, you'll see that they keep moving down by thirds. I know it's hard to tell from this first note here, but look at the second note and compare it to this chord here. And then the little flourishes, you'll see that those are moving down by thirds. Then the roots, down by fourth, up by second, down by fourth, up by second, down by fourth, up by second. But here we invert the second chord, so the bass line is moving down by steps. So there's a nice little descending third sequence with inversions. And again, we stop at the 2 chord, then we get back ourselves to functional harmony at the very ending. All right, let's go on to our next one. Now this one actually has 2 sequences, depending on how much you did. If you started where the arrow was, you would have had just one of these. But this actually has 2 sequences. It starts off with a descending fifth. That just happens for the first bracket and the second bracket. D, G, C, F in terms of the roots. Then the next, at the B flat chord, the 4 in F major, because we're modulating to F major here. This is a very fast moving ascending step sequence. So that's our second sequence here. Notice that the roots go B flat, G, C, A. So down by third, up by fourth. 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 And the other thing that's a giveaway here is notice how my brackets, the notes keep moving up. The melodic sequence keeps moving up by second. So again, it's one of these ascending second sequences where the root pattern is down by third, up by fourth. There is one spot where Bach alters the bass here. So instead of getting a root position, B flat, we get a first inversion one. All right, so it's kind of interesting, and this is a very short excerpt that you have kind of a very artful use of 2 different sequences, and kind of from a functional standpoint, the first one is used to modulate to F major, and the second one is used to kind of confirm F major. All right, next one. I didn't bother bracketing this one because the annotations on the example already kind of gave it away. This is an ascending fifth. Really not the best example of it, to be honest, but if you kind of think about the notes that are starting this and the notes that are circled, you'll see that they're moving up by second. And you'll see that, well, in other words, you'll see that this and this is basically moving up by second. See how the E to A is answered by F sharp to B there, how that's up by second, even though it actually goes down by seventh instead. But the root pattern there, A, E, B, F sharp, ascending fifth. As I mentioned, this is the least common type of sequence to begin with, so it's not the best example. You will find some better ones in the repertoire. All right, let's go on to the last page. Last page, yet another descending fifth. As you analyze the chords, though, you would have found the difference here is that I used the music used some seventh chords. Here, once we started on this second sequential bit here, again with the brackets moving down by second, every chord has a seventh. So if you look at the harmonies here, F major seventh, B flat major seventh, you notice you get the incomplete, complete, incomplete, complete kind of thing happening. And that one just stays in the key of D minor. One thing that's kind of interesting about this one is that it's the same thing we kind of saw a little bit in the Rachmaninoff example, is that the first two measures also they kind of start you off with the descending fifths. We go D, G minor, then we go to C, and then the true melodic sequence sets in. So it's almost like there's a little bit of a prelude to the actual sequence in the first two measures. All right, and finally, here's a great example, I think, from Pergolesi of an ascending step sequence. This is the one that goes to a first inversion triad. So notice how the bass is just static in each one, but the brackets are showing you how you keep moving up by second. But if you look at the chords, down by third, up by fourth, down by third, up by fourth, down by third, up by fourth, down by third, up by fourth. It's just that root motion is really obscured by the fact that we invert this second chord, so you get this static bass line. It just doesn't sound the same as the other ones. And then my functional labels, you actually start off on 4, and then you end with a 5, 6 to 1 in this example. All right, so there you go. Basically, you're going to draw on all these little factors when determining which sequence is being used, and follow this format for doing your homework. This is what I want to see. I'm not going to be too picky about you getting the correct chord quality right, even though that's, of course, an important skill. I'm mostly interested in you getting the correct chord or root and position, and having the brackets and identifying things correctly.